Yo, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of The Sauce. College football Saturday, I'm only going through 5 or 6 games. I just picked a handful of what I thought are the biggest games. I don't have a ton of time this week. With NBA starting, my time's a little limited. So we'll go through about 5 or 6. Live show Saturday morning, 10:30 a.m. We'll go through a lot more. And of course, I'll post everything on the website for those of you that don't want to wait till the live show. So let's get started. 5 games, week 11. Let's go.
Welcome to The Sauce. The Sauce.
First up, let's talk Big Ten. Michigan on the road in Happy Valley to play Penn State. Penn State catching 4.5 points at home here. Total sitting at 45.5. Money is definitely coming in on Michigan. The public's on Michigan. Sharp action also seems to be on Michigan. Line hasn't moved from 4.5. I did see 5.5 at one point, but for the most part, I'm looking at 4.5s across the board at the time of recording this. So let's start with some matchup history. Michigan's taken 3 of their last 5 against Penn State, including 2 in a row, and including in 2021, a win in their last trip out to Happy Valley. Score of that game was 21-17 though, so we should take note that Penn State would have covered the plus 4.5. As far as trying to break these two teams down on the field, this is challenging because there's just the Big Ten is so top heavy. There's such a drop off in production that it's really hard to get a feel for these teams. I know a lot of people don't look at Michigan as a passing offense because they haven't really thrown for a ton of yards, but J.J. McCarthy's killing it. Michigan's 5th in the FBS in yards per attempt and 6th in effective pass. Again, and you're going to hear me say this a lot, we have to question the competition. Here are Michigan's opponents' effective pass ranks on the season. I mean, we've got Rutgers at 34th, Nebraska at 24th. Those are the 2 strongest defenses Michigan has seen so far. Penn State's clearly better than those 2 teams. Right now, they sit 20th in effective pass, 21st in passing yards allowed per game, and 22nd in yards per attempt. But again, I got to say the same thing about this Penn State pass defense that I say about the Michigan team. I mean, against who? Because they were first in effective pass entering the Ohio State game. Then Kyle McCord pieced them up a little bit, 8.2 yards per attempt. And since then, they've fallen all the way back to 20th. And I mean, they haven't quite looked the same since then. As the competition got tougher for Penn State, we saw them drop in rank. I mean, Ohio State 8th, Maryland 16th. We finally saw them see some strong offenses, and they didn't look nearly as elite. So I have questions about the Michigan passing attack. I got questions about the Penn State pass defense. Now let's talk about the Michigan rushing offense, and guess what? Yeah, I'm questioning this as well. On the season, if you look at the numbers, this is a really good rushing attack. I mean, they're ranked 8th in effective rush, just 48th in rushing yards per game and 41st in yards per carry. Now, they've been in so many blowout games that the reason they're 8th in effective rush with stats that don't look quite as elite is when they're blowing a team out and they're just running the ball in the second half. Those carries don't weigh in on the metrics quite as much as a 3rd and 3 run for 4 yards. But are we seeing this Michigan rushing attack fall off recently? I mean, 3.2 yards per carry against Purdue. They did rush for 5 touchdowns, but 3.2 yards per carry? I mean, if you look, the first 3 games of the year, they were averaging 5.23 yards per carry. And their average opponent's effective rush was 31st. So they were seeing better run defenses and averaging 5.23 yards per carry. In their last 6 games, their opponent average effective rush rating is 71st. So they've seen bad run defenses and they're averaging just 3.5 yards per carry. I don't trust this Michigan rushing attack right now. Penn State's run defense looks serious. I mean, they're 1st in rushing yards per game allowed at 56, 1st in yards per carry allowed. I mean, statistically, this is a dominant run defense. Last week, they gave up negative 51 rushing yards, just 2.4 yards per carry the week before that against Indiana. They have dominated every opponent. Penn State went on the road into Columbus and held Ohio State to just 79 yards on the ground, just 1.9 yards per carry. Now, Trevion Henderson didn't play in that game for the Buckeyes, and Ohio State was having problems getting the run game going without him, so take that with a grain of salt. But still, Penn State run defense is not to be played with. I think Michigan's going to struggle to move the ball in this game. That offense is wildly unproven. J.J. McCarthy really hasn't been tested at all this year, and he's going to in this one. On the other side of the ball, though, I mean, Penn State has their own handful of problems. Obviously, Drew Aller in the passing attack hasn't been quite what they were hoping for. Just 34th in effective pass, 74th in passing yards per game, 100th in passing yards per attempt. And you could see the spots where they struggled the most are the only times they saw decent defenses. They've seen 3 teams that rank 30th or better in pass defense, in effective pass: Ohio State, Illinois, and Iowa. Now, in the Iowa game, Aller played pretty well, but they shut Iowa out, and they were running the ball pretty well in that one. He really didn't have to do much. He only threw for 166 yards in that game. But he was bad against Illinois. He was bad against Northwestern. He was bad against Ohio State. How can we trust him to throw the ball in this Michigan defense? Nobody's thrown the ball for 200 yards on Michigan's defense this entire season. They're allowing just 141 passing yards per game, which is first in the FBS, 7th in yards per pass attempt allowed, and 7th in effective pass. But again, I'm repeating myself here, but they haven't played anybody. You have to keep reiterating that when you're talking about the Michigan numbers. I mean, who's the best quarterback Michigan's seen so far this season? Hudson Card. I mean, seriously, Hudson Card might be the best quarterback Michigan's seen so far this year, but still, allowing 141 passing yards per game is impressive as hell regardless of who you're playing. What happens in this game comes down to the Penn State rushing attack. That's the backbone that this offense is supposed to be built on. They did nothing on the ground in Columbus, just 26 carries, 49 yards rushing on Ohio State, 1.9 yards per carry. They also struggled to run the ball at home against Indiana the week after that. Now, a bit of a flat spot after the Ohio State game, but 3.1 yards per carry at home against Indiana is not good. Now, they did follow it up with a solid game running the ball against Maryland. They went on the road to Maryland, ran the ball for 4.3 yards per carry, which is solid. Terps defense is pretty good this year. It's a lot better than I expected. But overall, I don't know if we could count on them running the ball against Michigan. On the season, Penn State's offense is still 14th in effective rush, so analytically, this is still a strong rushing attack, but 60th in rushing yards per game, 76 in yards per carry. In some of the games they've had in their schedule, they should definitely have better numbers than that. This is Michigan. I mean, obviously they have a good run defense. They're 9th in effective rush, 11th and 13th in yards per carry and yards per game allowed on the season. Look, I've already rambled for too long about this game. The truth is, if you were to take the top 5 teams in the Big Ten, right? Obviously, you'd have these two, Michigan and Penn State. The other 3 would be Ohio State, Iowa, and probably Wisconsin, maybe. Penn State's played 2 of those teams. Michigan's played 0. Penn State also went on the road and played a Maryland team, which is one of the better teams in the Big Ten. So I just respect Penn State's body of work a lot more than Michigan's. I don't know how much betting value there is in this game, but I'll be taking the under at 45.5 and Penn State plus 4.5. Definitely not one of my favorite games of the week, but I'll bet it. Next game. Let's talk SEC. Alabama on the road in Kentucky. Kentucky catching 10.5 points at home here. Total sitting at 46.5. Public is looking pretty split even on this one. Some sharp action definitely in on Kentucky, but line's still sitting at 10.5. I did see some 11s out there, but for the most part, I'm looking at 10.5. Some matchup history. So Alabama's been pretty good against Kentucky. Alabama's 38-2 all time against the Wildcats. The last time Kentucky beat Alabama was 1997. We'll start with the Kentucky passing attack, or the lack of a Kentucky passing attack, I should say. I mean, with the exception of the Tennessee game, they haven't been able to throw the ball this whole year. I mean, 128 yards on Georgia, 120 yards on Missouri, 161 yards on Mississippi State. That's a defense you should be able to throw the ball on. Yeah, look, 372 yards on the Tennessee defense is impressive, but it's clearly an outlier in the data. And that performance against Tennessee most likely will not be repeated against this Alabama pass defense, which is legitimate. They're 2nd in effective pass, 33rd in passing yards allowed per game, and 23rd in yards per pass attempt allowed, which is extremely impressive considering the schedule they've seen. We do have to mention, though, the last 2 weeks we've seen a couple offenses throw the ball in Alabama, both Tennessee and LSU. Both threw for over 270 yards, averaging 271.5 to be exact. Both throwing for 4 touchdowns, 7.3 yards per attempt. Now, one of those games was LSU, and I mean, Devin Leary is definitely not Jaden Daniels at all. And the other one's Joe Milton, and he really did all his damage in the first quarter. From the second quarter on, he didn't really do much in that game, so take those numbers with a grain of salt. This matchup for me comes down to the Kentucky run game. I mean, can Ray Davis get it going on the ground or not? Early in the season, Kentucky was looking like a serious rushing threat. The first 5 games, they were averaging 170 yards per game on the ground, 6.45 yards per carry. In their last 4, though, just 104 rushing yards per game on 3.87 yards per carry. Alabama's defense against the run, not nearly as good as they are against the pass. Just 41st in effective rush, 29th in rushing yards allowed per game, 24th in yards per carry allowed. So this Alabama defense can be run on. That's why I'm saying this is the matchup for me. Can Kentucky get Ray Davis going or not? We just saw LSU run the ball very efficiently on this Alabama defense. 24 carries, 206 yards on the ground, 8.6 yards per carry. That's dominant. And we know Kentucky is capable of coming out with a physical, dominant rushing attack. So, I mean, if they're able to get the run game going, I think Kentucky could be a live dog in this game. On the other side of the ball, I'm not sure how to handicap this Alabama offense right now because Jalen Milroe looks pretty good. I mean, we're talking about 4 games in a row where he's looked solid. He's connecting on big plays. I know the Arkansas game, that 48% completions doesn't look great, but he threw for 220 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had a 176 passer rating, so he wasn't bad in that game. In the last 4 games, we've seen him play well against Tennessee, Texas A&M. I mean, these are good defenses. Texas A&M might have the best pass rush in the country. He's matched up against the Kentucky pass defense, which is a tough unit to get a read on. I mean, they looked great against Brady Cook in Missouri, which has been a tough passing attack to stop. Just 75 yards passing allowed to them, 6.0 yards per pass attempt, but they got lit up by Tennessee and lit up by Georgia, over 10 yards per pass attempt in both those games. Bottom line in this one, the fact that this game's being played in Kentucky means I have to take the points. I don't think Alabama has shown us enough on the road to lay double-digit points here. On the road in Texas A&M, they ended up winning by 6. They were the better team in that game, but it wasn't a dominant win by any stretch. They did dominate Mississippi State earlier in the season back on September 30th, but Mississippi State has no defense at all. This Kentucky team can play defense. They can stop the run. They can run the ball. I mean, 10.5 is just too many, so I'm going to take the points. Give me Kentucky plus 10.5 next game. ACC up next. We got Miami on the road at Florida State. Noles are laying 14.5 points in this one. 14.5. Total sitting at 50.5. Looking like we got a serious pros versus public setup in this one. Public definitely on Florida State. Sharp action definitely on the Canes. I'm going to save this one for the live show. There's just so many question marks here injury-wise. Tyler Van Dyke's been dealing with an injury. I think he's going to play, but he's been dealing with something. Florida State played their last game against Pittsburgh without both Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman. That's their number 1 and 2 receivers. There's just too many important question marks here, so I'm going to bet this game, and I can tell you I'm definitely leaning towards Miami plus 14.5, but I'm going to wait. I'll let you know Saturday morning, 10:30 a.m., and also post it on KyleKirms.com late Friday night. Next game. Vols are on the road at Mizzou. Missouri is catching 1.5 points at home here. Total is at 57.5, which is down from 58.5. Action's coming in pretty even on this one. Public is slightly leaning towards Tennessee. Consensus line has moved up from 1 to 1.5, but there are still ones out there. So depending on what your sportsbook is, there's 1.5s and there's ones. Recent history edge goes to Tennessee. Vols have taken 4 straight games against Mizzou, and the last 3 have been absolute blowouts. Missouri hasn't come within 3 touchdowns of Tennessee since 2019. As far as matching these two teams up on the field, obviously, Missouri coming off that loss to Georgia. They played them tough, though. Let's give Missouri some credit. They played Georgia tough, went into Athens, and they were able to hang with them. Final score was 30-21, but Missouri actually had a lead in the 3rd quarter. But overall, I got to be honest, I'm starting to lose a little bit of faith in this Missouri team. Well, I shouldn't say the Missouri team, specifically the passing offense of Brady Cook. He started off the season. That passing offense was explosive, but the last 3 games really haven't been good. Brady Cook completing just 57% of his passes, less than 200 yards per game, a 122 passer rating. He was lighting it up earlier in the year. Those days seem to be in the past. The 3 games before that, so the last 3 games haven't been good. The 3 games before that, he was averaging 382 yards per game with a 183 passer rating. Now, let's be fair. Last week, he did play Georgia in Athens. But there was a home game against South Carolina a couple games back. He also didn't do much against Kentucky either. And it's not like things are going to get easier for Brady Cook. The Vols defense admittedly is better against the run, but it's still solid against the pass. 45th in passing yards per game allowed, 32nd in yards per attempt allowed, 37th in effective pass. I know Tennessee just got lit up by Devin Leary, of all people, a couple weeks back. But I think part of that was Tennessee just getting caught off guard. Kentucky's been a run-first offense this entire season, and then they come out slinging the ball against Tennessee. Devin Leary was good in the game, but Tennessee just got straight up out-coached. Vol still ended up winning. They won 33-27 anyway. I'm not really a believer in the Missouri offense right now. I think they're going to struggle to score points in this one. I know Tennessee's defense struggled in their last 2 road games, but Missouri doesn't have the rushing attack that Kentucky and Alabama have to keep Tennessee's defense honest. On the other side of the ball, I really don't know what to think about Joe Milton anymore, because he was terrible to start the season. We were openly making fun of him on the show, but now we're looking at 3 consecutive great games in a row out of him, and now last week was a home game against UConn, so just throw that one out. But he was flawless the week before that on the road at Kentucky, which is a respectable defense. Now, Mizzou's defense is definitely better than Kentucky's, especially against the pass, but we've seen Missouri get lit up through the air a couple times this year. Carson Beck just had a great game against them, 254 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jaden Daniels went off on him. Will Howard had a good game throwing the ball in Missouri earlier in the season back in the Kansas State game. Do I trust Joe Milton to go on the road and throw the ball in this Missouri defense? Not really. I mean, I think he'll make some plays, but not entirely. But the point is, Joe Milton throwing the ball is the secondary part of this Tennessee offense. The Vols offense lives and dies by the run game. That kid, Jalen Wright, is a monster. Vols have a top 10, I mean, probably even a top 5 rushing attack in the FBS this year. 4th in rushing yards per game, 7th in yards per carry, 5th in effective rush. We just saw Tennessee go on the road and run the ball all over Kentucky. Kentucky's got a top 25 run defense. They ran the ball all over them. Before that, they ran the ball all over Texas A&M, who's 11th or 12th in effective rush defensively. The only defense that's been able to slow down this Tennessee's rushing attack is Alabama in Tuscaloosa, and they still average 3.5 yards per carry. It's not like it was non-existent. Now, Missouri's defense against the run has been pretty solid this year. They're 34th in rushing yards per game allowed, 55th in yards per carry allowed, 22nd in effective rush. But both Kentucky and Texas A&M have higher rated run defenses than Missouri, and the Vols ran all over both those teams, which is why I gotta side with the public on this one. I think Tennessee is going to control the pace of this game using the run. Anything under 3, I'd take them. At 1.5, I might end up just playing Tennessee money line. Definitely on the Vols, though. Next game. Ole Miss on the road in Athens. Georgia's laying 10.5 points at home here. Total sitting at 58. Public's coming in pretty split on this one. Sharp action definitely on Georgia. This line was at 11 earlier in the week. It's down to 10.5. I still do see a couple 11s out there, though. So the head-to-head history between these two, it's interesting. So the last time these two teams met was 2016. Georgia had beaten Ole Miss 10 straight times dating back to 1996. So entering 2016, Georgia had won 10 straight. Ole Miss beat Georgia in 2016, but then that win was later vacated during the Hugh Freeze recruiting violation crap. So technically, Ole Miss hasn't beaten Georgia since 1996, but in reality, they did beat them the last time they played in 2016. It just didn't count. I mean, I don't know, trying to keep up with this NCAA drama. It's like Real Housewives of college football. Before we take a look at any numbers, we have to mention that this game is at home in Athens, where Georgia has not lost a football game since October 12th, 2019. It's been over 4 years since they lost here, but we're not asking who's going to win the game. We're asking who's going to cover the number. And also, this Ole Miss team this year might be the second best regular season opponent Georgia's seen here in that time span, maybe second to the Hendon Hooker Tennessee team of last year. So as we know, this Georgia offense is pass first. I mean, never thought we'd see this. This team lives and dies by the passing attack. They're 4th in effective pass this year, 8th in passing yards per game, 14th in yards per pass attempt. Want to know how good the Georgia passing attack has been? This is considered a down game for Carson Beck. Completed 65% of his passes, 254 yards, 2 touchdowns, a 152 passer rating. That was considered one of his lesser performances of the season. That's a great game. And he's at home matched up against an Ole Miss defense that struggled to stop the pass this year. Just 42nd in effective pass, 73rd in passing yards per game allowed, 75th in yards per attempt allowed. The last time Ole Miss saw an elite quarterback, Jaden Daniels tore these guys up. 414 yards through the air, 4 touchdowns. And last week, Texas A&M, Max Johnson, definitely not an elite quarterback, he pieced them up. Max Johnson, 305 yards through the air, 73% completions, a 138 passer rating. I mean, Ole Miss really struggles to stop the pass. Last week, I was talking about how the Georgia run game was coming back. And then really didn't show up much against Missouri. I think they averaged 4 yards per carry in that game. And that's 2 weeks in a row where the run game was looking kind of meh, like it was earlier in the season. For a couple weeks there, rewind back 3 or 4 weeks, it looks like Georgia was getting the run game going. It looks like they were getting Edwards rolling, but seems to be falling back down. Georgia's run game just isn't what it was last year. And Ole Miss defensively is actually pretty strong against the run. They're 26th in effective rush, 26 in yards per carry allowed on the season. In fact, since they got lit up in that LSU game, that was 4 games ago, Ole Miss is allowing just 3.2 yards per carry in their last 4. Now, they saw Auburn, Arkansas, Texas A&M. I mean, not exactly electric offenses, but a 4-game stretch with an SEC schedule, 3.2 yards per carry allowed is impressive. Now we get to the other side of the ball, and this is where we can start to find some value on Mississippi. Georgia hasn't seen an offense this year that can both run the ball and throw the ball, and now they're going to. Ole Miss is 11th in effective pass, 23rd in effective rush. We know how good that Texas A&M defense is this year. Ole Miss carved them up pretty badly. 387 yards through the air, 131 yards on the ground. This unit should definitely scare you if you're a Georgia fan. Now, Georgia has not had problems stopping the pass this year. They're 14th in effective pass, 18th in passing yards per game allowed, and 5th in yards per pass attempt allowed. But their performance against Missouri just doesn't really move the needle for me. Yeah, they shut down Brady Cook. He barely did anything, as as we were just talking about in the last game. But Brady Cook has been struggling for multiple weeks, as we just mentioned. So that doesn't really move the needle for me. And it's very possible that Ole Miss can run the ball in this Georgia defense. Bulldogs' run defense is down this year. Just 33rd in yards per carry allowed, 35th in effective rush. Just look at the last 2 Georgia games. Missouri averaged 4.4 yards per carry on them. Florida averaged 4.7 yards per carry on them. Neither of those rushing attacks are ranked in the top 50. Neither of them. Ole Miss, with the combination of Judkins and Dart, this is a much more dangerous rushing attack than either of those 2 teams, which is why I'm taking the points in this one. I'm taking Ole Miss. Full disclosure, and I was talking about this last week, I can't seem to get these Georgia games right. I am 1-4 betting on Georgia games this year. Hopefully the turnaround starts now, but you can still get 11s out there, so I'm taking it. Give me Ole Miss plus 11. That's all the time I have for this one. Like I mentioned earlier, live Saturday morning, 10:30 a.m. We'll go through, I think I got 17 or 18 games lined up, so we'll go through a bunch of them. Also, if you don't want to wait for that, I'll post them all late Friday night. KyleKirms.com. I'll have my top bets and stuff on there. Last couple Saturdays have been brutal for me, especially the night games. So hopefully that turns around. But yeah, so I'll post late Friday night on KyleKirms.com all of my top bets, or live show Saturday morning. We'll just go through all the games and make our picks. So hopefully see you in the comments. Remember to bet responsibly, and I will talk to you in the Discord.